Good morning. I'm Susan Houghton from the Livermore Lab Foundation. I'd like to just go back one slide, if we can, to the roads to removal. There we go. Yep. Thank you. If you want more information on the report that JP, Jennifer Petridge, just talked about, it is at roadstoremoval.org. We also have the executive summary that we passed out today. There are a plethora of videos. You can do a deep dive. You'll be able to do actually a county by county analysis. All 3,143 counties in the United States were mapped as part of that. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. We are on a road show with the report, and Wyoming is our next stop next week. But in early 2025, the Livermore team will be going to Sacramento to specifically work with policymakers, local governments to help do the deeper dive on what this could mean for California. So now we're going to start to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And our first topic is going to be on workforce realities and solutions. And as Dave Metz begins to come up here today, let me tell you a little bit about him. He is the partner and president of FM3 Research, a well-respected national opinion firm working with government agencies, nonprofits, and businesses. One of their core areas of research is conservation, clean energy, and climate change. That was important to us when we started working with Dave, the Livermore Lab Foundation, in 2020, because we began to partner on a series of qualitative and quantitative engagement efforts that really made us help us identify what Californians thought about climate change, what they knew about carbon neutrality, and how they cared, if they cared, and what kind of information they needed to be able to make informed decisions. Those results have supported the Foundation's community education, outreach, and engagement efforts throughout the Central Valley. 2 months ago, we asked Dave to come back again with his team to do an analysis of workforce. And later today, you're going to be hearing from Kim Mayfield, who is one of the authors of Roads to Removal. You heard from JP that we are just now at that formative stage of the economy. The Tri-Valley's economy of $47 billion. We know that we can take that places with carbon, but we need the workforce to do that. And in order to have a good workforce, you need great training. So that was what the point of the survey was, asking employers what they needed and how we can fill that need. Today, Dave will be providing a short executive summary of those results, and afterwards we'll have a panel discussion with Dr. Kim Mayfield, research scientist at Lawrence Livermore, and the lead author of the EEEJ chapter, as well as Dr. Nan Ho, who is the vice president of academic services at Las Posias College. Our panelists will not join the stage until after Dave presents, so please join me in welcoming Dave Metz.
All right, good morning. Pleasure to be with you today, taking on such an important subject and hearing a little bit about what local employers here in the Tri-Valley think about some of the potential and challenges that are facing the workforce as we try to expand this sector and this work. I'm going to move through some of the key findings of the research fairly quickly so that we can get to the panel discussion, but we'll be happy to have a more extended discussion with any of you who are interested. Some of the key findings that came out of the research are summarized here. And again, I think they reflect perceptions of both benefits and challenges that the region faces right now. The employers that we spoke to were very positive about the Tri-Valley's positioning. Geographically, being between the Bay Area and the Central Valley, having access to a highly educated, well-trained workforce that's working at some of the foremost institutions in the country on these issues are strengths. But at the same time, there was a shortage of particularly skilled labor that is ready to work in these industries in this regulatory environment to meet the needs of a growing industry. And there are a variety of other concerns that our respondents pointed to. Costs. This is a concern across most business sectors these days, but this one in particular. The complex web of regulations that federal, state, and local authorities impose on these technologies, and the lack of public understanding. The fact that for most members of the public, the idea of carbon removal is a subject they have not spent 1 second thinking of. And you've got to really introduce that idea to them before you can get them to think about its potential, both in terms of its benefits for the environment and for the economy. There was a lot of hope that moving forward, there is the capacity in this region to provide the workforce with the kind of training that it needs to succeed. But the participants that we talked to also had some recommendations about steps they think that could be taken that will help them in making connections with that workforce. So the data that I'm sharing today come from a total of 44 interviews that we conducted with leaders in a variety of sectors throughout the Tri-Valley region, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, and elected officials. About half of the interviews we conducted were in-person, in-depth interviews, which were largely open-ended. Asked a few questions, gathered the respondents' perspectives. The other half came from a more quantitative survey where we asked people a series of closed-ended questions and are able to tally some percentages within our relatively small sample that tell us the general direction of opinion among these participants. And so we've kind of combined both elements of the research to share the key findings that we have today. First, as I said before, there's just a lot of appreciation about the strengths that this region offers as a place for new industries to develop. That includes both a highly skilled workforce and also the availability of land, which is something that is a premium in other parts of California. A lot of our respondents also talked about the benefits of having access both to the Bay Area and to the Central Valley and the willingness of people to locate here because of its convenience to those two locations, the presence of a lot of folks who are already used to significant commutes in the area. We asked our respondents about their views of both the green economy and carbon removal technology. Some of our respondents worked in directly related fields, and they had a lot to say. Others are employers whose work may touch on these fields, but isn't necessarily directly involved. But what we found was that all these participants had at least some basic level of familiarity with both California's existing laws about reducing carbon emissions. 81% told us they had at least some familiarity with it. When we do surveys of the general public, we find that number is closer to 60% among Californians at large. And when we asked them specifically about carbon removal technologies and green energy technologies, we saw a very similar level of familiarity, about 4 and 5 telling us that they knew something about those types of technology. We explored the language that we used a little bit to get the participants' reaction to both the terms green energy economy and carbon economy. And when people heard green energy, they all sort of went to the same place. They thought largely about renewable energy, about wind and solar power, other kinds of renewables. They heard the term carbon economy very differently. For some, they thought that was just the status quo. It's an economy that's reliant on fossil fuels, where we're putting too much carbon into the atmosphere. Others thought specifically of existing policies like cap and trade that make it possible to regulate the amount of carbon that's being emitted. And others thought about emerging technologies for carbon capture. So that phrase was one that had a little more diverse understanding than when we talked about the green energy economy. We also offered our respondents a list of words and phrases, which you'll see running down the left-hand side of the slide, which might describe both the green energy economy and carbon removal and storage, and asked them how applicable they thought each phrase was. I don't want to fixate too much on the individual percentages here, but there's some sort of groups of perceptions that are widely shared and then some that are not. At the top of the slide, there's 3 items that 3/4 of our participants said were good descriptions: growing, hopeful, important to the environment. Those are all obviously very encouraging, but also challenging. In fact, there was stronger agreement with that description than anything else. And we'll talk in a few minutes about some of the elements of the challenges. Note down at the bottom of the slide, the one item that everyone rejected, or almost everyone rejected as a descriptor, was unnecessary. So the importance of making this transition was pretty broadly recognized. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through a couple of these. So for some of the challenges that our respondents saw, the regulatory process and the permitting process were something that almost all of them mentioned in some capacity. One respondent told us, it seems like the system is engineered to make it easy to get to no, but not easy to get to yes. It's long, it's expensive, and that disincentive to getting things done was a significant barrier that many mentioned. And a few talked about how in other states the regulatory regime is much less restrictive, and that makes it tempting for some investment to flow places other than California for that reason. There was also a number that noted the tension that exists between California's overall goal of reducing carbon emissions on a rapid time frame and then regulatory and permitting processes that make it hard to take the steps that will get to that goal with the same degree of urgency. There were lots of concerns about costs that our respondents mentioned as well. The cost both to businesses from inputs, capital expenditures, but also the cost to workers, skilled workers who employers want to locate here in a place where housing is about as expensive as it is anywhere in the country. All of those were things that they struggled with, and they noted that grants, tax credits, incentives, anything that can be done to ease those financial burdens will help to move progress forward. In the survey, where we had some closed-ended questions, we specified a variety of specific kinds of barriers that might keep people from further investment in the green energy sector. We had people rate how big a barrier they thought each one was. You'll notice that a lot of the top barriers that people rated connected to costs in various different ways. Capital expenditures are too high, the ROI is uncertain, housing is too expensive, market demand is too limited. But generally speaking, the things that they were less inclined to view as barriers were those that had to do with whether investing in this sector is worthwhile at all. Other environmental technologies are more appealing. Technology is not relevant to my company. Company has higher priorities. All of those were seen as being relatively modest barriers. So when asked what could be done in order to both facilitate the growth of the green energy economy and also carbon removal and storage technology, you'll see a number of the ideas that our respondents suggested here. A lot of it had to do with making permitting and approval processes simpler, more streamlined. Those were things that people saw as being very helpful. And then the same thing that I think a lot of employers in all sectors think would be beneficial. More housing supply, reducing the cost of housing, essential for attracting skilled workers. I'm going to just move us along to talking finally about sort of skills and recruitment barriers that the respondents cited. We heard that almost no one we talked to said that they were not interested in hiring. Almost everybody wanted to hire more workers and said they were having trouble finding workers who had the specific skill sets that they needed. In that context, they embraced a wide range of strategies that might be employed to support their company's hiring goals. From the survey here, you'll see the percentages that said each of the items listed would be helpful. They add up to way more than 100% because most respondents said, all of this sounds good. There's lots of things on this list that would be beneficial for me. Note that the thing that is at the top of the list is vocational trade schools or community colleges, where we are right now. And we've seen this when we do surveys of the general public as well. There's overwhelming sentiment in favor of greater investment in community colleges, vocational and technical education relative to four-year colleges. There's a broad perception that there's a lot more benefit we can get from significantly expanding capacity for those kinds of institutions. And then when we asked people to think about the specific kinds of skills they were seeking from their employees, you'll see the categories that were most often selected here. And again, people could select more than one. At the top of the list were engineering, operators and technicians, IT and data analysis, and basic and applied science research. When we asked people to think ahead to what they might need in a few years in terms of the kinds of skills they'd like workers to have, the list was virtually identical, with engineering once again at the top of the list, basically the same categories there. So I will close with a couple of responses from one of the final questions in the research, where we asked people to tell us in their own words what the coalition of organizations that's brought us all here today could do to help regional businesses advance and invest in the green energy sector. And you'll see just a handful of some of the suggestions that our respondents made about ways they think they could benefit. So I know that was a whirlwind summary, but I'll hand it back to Susan and we'll discuss this more with the panel.
Thank you, Dave. I'm now going to invite our panelists to join us on stage, Dr. Nanho and Dr. Kim Mayfield, and we'll open it up for a little bit of discussion. We've got some questions here we'll start with, and then we encourage you to think about your questions from the audience as well. So, are we all on? Yes, good. Kim, I'm going to start it off with you. We saw a stat earlier that in Jennifer Petridge's presentation about how many jobs we were talking about, 444,000, I think 440,000 jobs. What is the definition of a good job? Talk to us about what that means, because when people see that number, is that a construction job or why? What's the differentiation?
All right. Okay. It's on. So what we did in the report is we thought about what we wanted to use as our benchmark number, and we wanted to be as conservative as possible. So when we report jobs, we specifically only included long-term jobs that would stay there. So actually, it does not even include the construction jobs. It doesn't include construction. It doesn't include project development. It's actually only the operations and maintenance jobs, and then for the bikers, it includes the agricultural jobs that are necessary to even collect and transport that biomass to the facility. So it's only ones that would continue to operate even after facilities are built. So there is also, for example, there's companies down in Texas that are moving their own construction fleet of thousands of employees from project to project. As they build one, they move on to the other. So those are, pseudo long-term, but we did not include those in our analysis just to be conservative.
So when we think about those jobs, good jobs going forward, and we think about what we saw in the survey about the types of things that folks are looking for benefits, help us understand what community benefits are, Kim, and what is important for people to know. We went over quickly housing. Housing was one of the ones. If we can go back to that slide about housing, that would be great. And that was one of the top needs for workers to be able to be workers here. And that's considered a community benefit. So talk to us about the importance of that.
Yeah, so when it comes to housing specifically, on the survey that was done, not only here in the Tri-Valley, but also for San Joaquin County, Kern County, up and down the Central Valley, housing, it did not matter which neighborhood you were looking at. It did not matter which county. That was always in the top 3 for things people were concerned about in previous surveys and then the most recent one. When it comes to the community benefit plan writing, I can speak to one that we just finished up with the Department of Energy's Carbon Safe Plan. Specifically looks into how will your project impact housing availability. If you are taking down or removing housing, you have to put that back up or the Department of Energy will not like your project.
Before we jump into the expertise that Nan and Las Positas have, I do want to spend a moment on community benefit plan, because for a lot of people, what is that? Could you talk for a second about the Justice 40 initiative and how a community benefit plan is now really viewed upon by the Department of Energy and the federal government as to being a key component? Yes, you need the technology. Yes, you need the expertise, but it's the community benefit plan.
Yeah, so the community benefit plan is worth anywhere between 15 to 25% of your overall score when it comes to proposal review, depending on if you're at R&D or deployment scale. It's increased once you make it to deployment scale. And the community benefit plan, one of the ways that you can best get prepared to respond to one is to actually have survey data showing what people in that area consider to be a benefit, because it is not the same everywhere you go. We're working right now with communities in Four Corners, Wyoming, North Slope of Alaska, and Stockton, and no area is the same. People have different priorities based on where you live and based on the things that you're interested in and facing. So you find out what the needs are first, and that your community benefit plan works to address those needs. So if housing, for example, keeps showing up as something that is of paramount need, then maybe you're including workforce housing, or maybe you're including some benefit that amounts to that, construction of housing, subsidies for housing. But then also there's some other places where, They say the number one thing that we need is long-term jobs. And so you really focus on employment, but not just employment in general, but local hires was the thing that people in some areas really cared a lot about. For example, in the area around the Navajo generating station, that was of paramount concern. So local hires was one that was really important. And then when it comes to the Justice 40 initiative, there's essentially a map. It's really user-friendly. You can go check it out online. You can zoom into individual census tracts or neighborhoods, and you can see how the Department of Energy scores your benefits flowing to those different census tracts. So they don't want them going only to census tracts where people are already doing pretty dang good, but instead they want them to go to ones where there needs to be equity enhanced outreach. So for example, if you're having a hiring day, if you're having a career fair, a job fair, doing it in that census tract where people don't need to transport themselves out of town, that could be helpful.
Could be helpful. Also, what's helpful is obviously having a community college like Las Positas and Chabot to be able to say, we're here to help. And you must have been thrilled to see those stats, Nan, and how it really sets the stage for how important training and education is.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. It's really wonderful to be here, and I want to welcome you all on behalf of Las Positas College. I'm really excited to see our students, our faculty. We have several administrators here as well. The reason I point out those members of our audience is because that is your workforce and those are your advocates. We stand ready as a district to support the needs of our local industry, and it's especially wonderful to see startup and our national labs here, the full range of needs that you may have for the workforce. So one of the things I thought I could share with you is how we are responsive. We try to be an agile organization, and we sit in conversation, very much like what you just shared. Each of you has a different workforce need, and many of you sit on our advisory boards on different types of industries. For example, I noticed the agriculture. We have an agricultural, viticulture, horticulture. We also have engineering, and we have welding and automotive, all of these different advisory boards. So you're already communicating with us what your workforce needs are. What our faculty do, several of them in this room, they listen to industry, and then in those advisory boards, they review our curriculum on a periodic basis. That's part of our natural process as well. And we ask our industry partners, here's a degree or a certificate that we offer for credit. Is this actually still meeting your needs? It can actually get down to the level of the course. So that's really, really important. And it is a regenerative process, and it continues to update. And faculty are very, very interested in updating their curriculum, especially with the hands-on skills that have really come through in these survey results as well. So that's your classic credit type of offering that we offer at both Las Positas and Chabot, and that is one that many of us are very familiar with in our own credentials. But sometimes we need to move faster than that, and so we try to be agile, and there are different opportunities to address that as well. We also have something called non-credit, and this one portion of non-credit is career development and college prep. So much of your workforce is actually growing through our school system. And so we want to be able to reach them and provide them the skills, including several soft skills that are going to be related to your industry. Some a really good example of these two types of programs, engineering technology is a program that we developed here many years ago, and it's actually nationally recognized. And I had the great pleasure to work with Beth McCormick. Where are you, Beth? So yes, on this program, it's nationally recognized and a model system to develop the technologist level in the national labs, where someone can come with a 2-year degree and be able to have a well-paying job, brings them into the middle class, and supports the work of our national labs. So it's a real model system. So in terms of our non-credit, we've had a lot of work in our automotive. We actually see one of our technicians here from the automotive program. So there's automotive. We actually have a fairly new drone technology, which is used in multiple industries for assessment. A lot of the agricultural work we've just been talking about. So that was a non-credit program that's been developed, and we actually have pilots that are licensed based on taking that course and that certificate. So those are types of things that take a little time to develop, but we also are really excited that we partnered with Lawrence Livermore National Lab a year and a half ago or so to write a grant, $500,000 grant to the National Nuclear Security Administration to create a program called REAP, Rapid Education and Placement. And that was a need because we knew that curriculum sometimes takes a long time to do. Education is a system, so it takes time. Sometimes we need to be faster than that. So what we did was the lab, identifying what the needs are in the exact organization that is there, told us these are some 7 different skills that we really need to develop in our workers, not only in our incumbent workers, but also in our pipeline in the community. And so we developed this grant, and we, instead of offering it through credit or non-credit, we actually leaned on our ability to offer community education. So we've already offered that in welding because it is such an important skill. It was showed up on our skill set in the survey as well, to actually do some welding in a very, very fast 8-week or even 6-week session, and actually bring in incumbent workers from the lab and some of our local companies, and then be able to get them out. It was wonderful. So we're developing the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh of those skills as well, and hope to keep those moving forward. And the wonderful thing about all of this is that you can take those community ed, which is what we call not for credit, and it can actually segue into credit and credit-bearing courses, which is something that you may also want for your workforce, because many times your salary scales are based on the credential. And so this, again, helps to retain, recruit, and all of your employees. So that's just a variety of different touch points that we have. We're very eager. We stand here ready to listen and to adapt. And what's really exciting, I see Julia Dozier here. So there's another type of education we have, which is called contract education. It's offered through our district office. And so Julia and I will sometimes share things. Hey, I have someone who needs this need. Do you have someone over there that can actually provide that need? And she will do the same as we send it out to the colleges. And one last really wonderful thing, our colleague at Chabot, my peer at Chabot is here, Dr. Forbes. We talk a lot about apprenticeships, because that is basically the learn to earn, learn and learn. So those are developed again with the specific industry that wants an apprentice to be able to make a living, to actually increase their wages through their progression through the apprenticeship. And Chabot has a very, very strong apprentice program, and Las Positas is also developing that. We have one that in construction labor. And we also are actually beginning to develop one in horticulture. So it's a really exciting time, and we, as a district, stand here ready to listen and then to adapt as quickly as possible.
Thank you. You know, Dave, going back to the survey, I was struck that folks are still kind of confused by the difference between a green economy or a carbon economy. It kind of parlays to some earlier stats that we saw, that when you ask people about, going green, everyone can say solar, they can say electric, they can say some of the things. How do we need to look at that going forward in terms of nomenclature and jargon and defining? And what are you seeing that might be different in California and the Bay Area versus the nation?
So it's a good question. I think some of the distinctions we saw among the employers that we interviewed here are pretty similar to what we see when we talk to the general public. What we labeled the green economy in this research, the public also understands. They know a lot about solar power, about wind power, about electrification. They're largely on board with those concepts, although the particulars can vary. The term green economy is not generally one that works really well with the public, because they hear green and they think the Green Party. They think sort of a more strident environmental politics. Or they think this is what corporations do, and they want us to think they're environmentally friendly. You know, NBC rolls out its Green Week of sitcoms and things like that. Clean, renewable tend to be terms that connect with the general public in a little bit more concrete way. It sort of speaks to the reason these sources of energy are beneficial. But whatever we call it, the public is on board with it. When we talk about carbon removal, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, for the general public, for most of them, unless you live in a community like a few here in California where there actually are potential projects moving forward and there have been attempts to educate the public, people haven't heard of it. They haven't thought about it. It can sound fantastical to them to think that we could remove carbon from the air and store it underground. But the sort of default position of most Americans is that we have been able to innovate our way out of a lot of challenges the nation has faced over the years. And so they can believe that this is something we can do. But to get them from that point of thinking this may be a possibility to no, this is something that we can do, need to do, and should do, requires ongoing outreach and communication. And obviously that's something that the foundation has been heavily involved in.
And to your point, different terms in different cities and regions. I know, Kim, you're well aware of how talking about CDR and carbon dioxide removal in Indiana is different from Pennsylvania and is different from Wyoming. And share with us a little bit about the lessons learned that you've found when you've gone across the country as to how we've had to talk about it differently.
Oh boy, have we learned some lessons. Let's see. I'll give a few anecdotes. I think those are the best way to illuminate some lessons. Was talking to some NGOs in Stockton, San Joaquin County area, and when we were talking about community benefit plans and the concept of jobs, long-term jobs came up, immediately got pushed back and said, jobs are not a benefit. Move on. That doesn't count. And I said, oh, okay. Well, moving on then. Let's talk about other things. And they're mostly looking at, essentially a community benefit fund for local development. When I was in Wyoming, I was outside of Antelope Coal Mine, and let me tell you, jobs were paramount. They were definitely a benefit. They were a necessity. People were talking about it nonstop, about not only the quality of jobs and also how incredibly clean their air was. They said, when you go back and fly out of Denver, the air quality there is worse than it is here, and we are at an active coal mine, and they were very proud of that. And then when I was in Stockton, the jobs were not the thing that people were caring about. However, air quality really, really, really was. So it can even be about your geographical location that can make a difference in terms of what are being prioritized. And I think that what has been most effective is to hear what people are prioritizing and then talk about those things, because talking about things that people don't care about, that just doesn't sound like an efficient use of their time.
That's right. Yeah. So I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. We've got a few moments. Does anybody have any questions? Katie has the mic and we can answer any. Just raise your hand. And we'll be talking about other things later today. Anything about the survey? We will make the survey public as part of that, so you can get copies of it if anybody has any questions for Dave, Kim, or Nan.
Questions here?
How many students are here who are thinking of going into, I hate to say green career, so I'm going to say carbon type career going forward? Raise your hand if this is of interest to you, any kind of carbon career. See a couple up in there. See, so we've got some education to do. We've got to work on why it is important to go into these new jobs. And how are we going to do that, Nan?
Well, one of the things we can definitely do is we have a great outreach team here, and outreach is also inreach, meaning that we do career fairs where industries come to our campus and recruit for employees, interns. We have a job board, but we also do in-reach, meaning these types of events where we actually have our students in the room to hear what is the cutting edge technology, what are the needs of our region. And these are our students who oftentimes want to stay in the community, which is a really important metric for our business partners as well. So that's one area I wanted to share with you. Just across the way, we're running another symposium in the information technology field, also with students. So that's one of the areas that we can do that. And again, we're very responsive. So when we hear there's a need, and we have lots of partnerships in the Tri-Valley and in the entire region, we're very interested in pursuing those and finding ways to highlight the work that you are doing, and also that you need us to support you with.
Great. And on that note, I think we'll thank our panelists and move on to our next panel. Oh, we have one more. I'm sorry, I didn't see. Who do we have? Oh, sorry. Thanks, Brandon.
The survey is obviously a great source of information. So many of these industries are still emerging, some of them very rapidly. How do you think about developing the critical mass of users of what you produce, Nan, which is educated students. When you don't have one large employer or two large employers who are going to be taking in all of those students, and it's a little more decentralized and fragmented than that, how do you figure out what to teach?
That's a great question. We actually, in the convening that's across the way, that advisory board also has, big employers like the national labs and, some of our big software industry partners, but it also has very small businesses. So in the meetings that we generally have every half year, the faculty and the business partners actually look at emerging trends. That's actually one of the most important agenda topics is what's happening in the workforce? What do you need? What soft skills do you need? What technical skills do you need? And so they use that and they can actually very quickly adapt it into their existing curriculum, or they can actually adapt their curriculum formally. So we really listen, and I think that's something that, my ask to all of you is, please sit on our advisory boards. Tell us what you need, because we're ready to respond as quickly as we can. Brandon, does that address some of your questions? Okay, we did that actually with engineering technology as well. We did that with the REAP grant. We did that with the life sciences as well. What skills do we need? Yolanda, here we really advised the life sciences. We actually built bio badges in that same way. Little simple soft skills, touch base once, twice, 3 times, 3 courses. You've all developed that skill, and you've built expertise with each level. So all of those touch points are so incredible. And as you can hear, the partners are here. You all are here, and you've actually helped make us, as one of the #1 college and community college.
Can you say that again? What was that again? Let's hear that one more time. #1.
The #1 community college in California. So, but anyway, so but that's just a number. But it's really our heart, and it's our business sense, and it's our responsibility to our community. We stand ready as a district with Chabot, Las Positas, the district, contract ed. We're here.
And that transition from needing corporations to stand up and help gets us to our next panel that Yolanda is going to lead. So thank you, panelists, and let's move on.